The day I walked into my father's retirement party wearing my dress uniform, I thought the hardest part was already behind me. I had driven 4 hours from Ottawa to get there. 4 hours in November on the 401, through that particular kind of gray sky that makes the whole country look like it's holding its breath. I had ironed the uniform myself that morning, the way I always did, checking the metals twice, making sure the shoulders sat right. I don't know why I still cared so much about the details, force of habit maybe? Or something older than habit. My father had spent 32 years working for the city of Hamilton. Public works, roads and sewers, and the unglamorous machinery of a city that keeps going whether you notice it or not. He was proud of it in the way that men of his generation were proud of things, quietly, and only when talking to other men. When he retired, my aunt and my uncle organized a dinner at a hall on the East End. 80 guests, a slideshow, a cake with a fondant hard hat on top. He didn't call to tell me about it himself, my mother did. She called on a Tuesday evening and said, almost as an aside, that there was going to be a dinner, and that she thought I should come, and that my father, she paused here, in the way she always paused before saying something and she knew would sting, that my father hadn't asked her to call me, but that she thought I should know. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. My relationship with my father has always been something I tried to explain and failed. It wasn't dramatic. He never raised his hand to me, never screamed, never did any of the things that make a clean story. What he did was quieter than that. He had a way of being present in a room while making you feel invisible. Of asking how things were going and then, before you finished answering, turning back to whatever he was watching on television. He was a man who saved his real attention for things he considered worthy of it, and for most of my life, I hadn't made that list. My brother had. My brother Marcus, 3 years older, who had gone into the trades like my father always hoped, plumbing, eventually running his own small company out of Burlington. My father talked about Marcus the way people talk about a sunrise, like it was something you just had to witness to understand. I had joined the Canadian Armed Forces at 22. I didn't do it to prove a point. I did it because I needed structure and direction and a reason to be somewhere, and the forces gave me all three. I spent the first years in logistics. Then I moved into procurement. By the time I was 31, I was a captain, managing contracts worth more than I had ever thought I'd be trusted with. By 34, I was working out of National Defense Headquarters, and the files on my desk involved numbers that I couldn't casually mention at a dinner table without making people uncomfortable. My father's response, when I told him about my promotion to captain, was to ask if I got more vacation days. I should have let go a long time before I did. But there is something about a father. Something that doesn't follow logic. You can know, with every rational part of yourself, that a person is never going to give you what you need, and you can still show up at their retirement dinner in November, having ironed your uniform twice. I arrived at the hall just after 7. The parking lot was already full. Through the windows I could see the warm light inside and the shapes of people moving past tables. I sat in my car for a minute longer than I needed to. I had driven 4 hours. I told myself that counted for something. When I got out of the car, the cold hit me the way November always does in Hamilton. Not gently. I straightened my jacket and walked toward the entrance. I saw my father before he saw me. He was standing near the doors with my uncle and 2 men I didn't recognize. Probably coworkers. From the way they were all standing with drinks and the relaxed posture of people who have been colleagues for decades. My father was laughing at something. It was a real laugh, the kind I recognized because I had seen it directed at Marcus so many times. He looked comfortable, happy even, like a man who felt he was exactly where he belonged. Then he turned and saw me. The laugh didn't disappear exactly. It more slowly vacated his face. He looked at me, at the uniform, and something moved behind his eyes that I couldn't quite read. It wasn't pride. I knew what pride looked like on him. It also wasn't anger. It was something more complicated. Something that looked almost like confusion, like he was trying to place me in a context that didn't compute. You came, he said. Not I'm glad you came, not you look good. Just you came, like he was noting a fact. Of course I came, I said. He nodded. His friends were still standing there. He didn't introduce me. I introduced myself. I went inside and found my mother near the gift table. She hugged me the way she always did. Too tight, for too long, the hug of a woman who knew she was compensating for someone else. She pulled back and looked at me and her eyes got bright. You look wonderful, she said. Thanks, Mom. He's glad you came, she said. He just doesn't know how to show it. I had been hearing some version of that sentence for 34 years. I had stopped finding it comforting somewhere around age 15. The dinner was exactly what you'd expect. There were speeches. My uncle spoke for too long, with too many inside jokes that landed only with the people who'd shared the specific 20-year arc he was referencing. A woman from the city office said something genuine and kind about my father's reliability. Marcus stood up and gave a toast that made half the room tear up. He talked about watching our father leave for work before dawn, about what it meant to see a man who never missed a day, who never complained, who just kept showing up. It was a beautiful toast. Marcus had always been the better speaker between us. My father looked at Marcus the whole time Marcus was talking, glowing. You could feel it from across the room. I was seated at a table near the back with a few cousins I barely knew, and my mother's friend from church. It was a fine table. A perfectly reasonable place to put a daughter who had driven 4 hours and whom no one had asked to speak. I ate the chicken and drank the sparkling water and answered polite questions about Ottawa. No, I don't mind the winters, yes. The drive wasn't too bad. The cousins were kind. My mother's church friend kept touching my sleeve and saying she loved the uniform, which I appreciated more than she knew. At some point during dessert, my father's old supervisor, a man named Terry, who had apparently known my father since they were both junior workers in the early 90s, stopped by our table. He sat down next to me for a moment, the way older men do when they want to have a real conversation and have given up on subtlety. "You're his daughter?" he said. "I am." He looked at me for a moment. "At the uniform, at the rank insignia, he talk about you much," Terry said. I smiled in a way that didn't mean anything. "He's a private person." Terry nodded slowly, in the way of a man who understood that there was more beneath that sentence than I was willing to surface. "Well," he said, "he should talk about you more." He went back to his table. I watched him go, and tried to decide what I was feeling. There was something painful about being seen clearly by a stranger. The person who was supposed to see you had spent a lifetime looking past you. After dinner, people moved around the room. My father circulated. He was good at this part. The handshakes, the reminiscing, the unhurried ease of a man in his own crowd. I watched him stop and put his arm around Marcus's shoulders. Watched Marcus laugh at something my father said. Watched my father lean in with the comfortable intimacy of someone who had practiced this relationship for years and found it reliable. I was standing near the windows when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my liaison at the department. There was a note about the morning briefing being moved, and a reminder about a contract review meeting I had at 9. The numbers in the note were large. The kind of numbers I had become accustomed to seeing, but that still sometimes stopped me for a moment. Not because they were impressive, but because they reminded me of the distance between the life I had built and the life I had grown up in. I put the phone away. My father was making his way toward the exit now to say goodbye to a group that was leaving. He passed me without stopping. Then he seemed to register that I was standing there and he paused. "You're staying in Hamilton tonight?" he asked. "No," I said. "I have an early meeting. I'll drive back tonight." He frowned slightly. "That's a long drive." "It's fine." He nodded. Then, without quite making eye contact, "The uniform, what rank is that now?" He didn't know. After 12 years, he didn't know what rank the insignia on my shoulders represented. "Captain," I said. "I've been a captain for 3 years." "Right," he said. "Right." He nodded again, as though he was filing this information for later. "That's good." He moved on to say goodbye to the people who were leaving. I stood at the window for a long moment. Outside, the parking lot was lit by those yellowish lights that make everything look like an old photograph. Somewhere across the lot, a few people were clustering near their cars, not quite ready to go home, extending the evening the way people do when they've had a good night. Near the edge of the lot, slightly apart from everything, there was a black car. Not a limousine exactly. This wasn't a wedding. It was a town car, the kind that corporate services use, dark and clean and parked just outside the reach of the lot lights. I noticed it because it looked out of place. Everyone else had driven regular cars, minivans, pickup trucks, the kind of vehicles that made sense for a municipal retirement party in Hamilton on a Tuesday in November. The driver was standing beside it. He was a man in his 50s, in a dark jacket, and he was looking at his phone. But as I watched, he looked up. He looked toward the hall. He looked specifically in my direction. Then he started walking toward the entrance. I stepped back slightly. I didn't know what I expected. He came through the door and looked around the room for exactly 2 seconds before finding me again. He walked toward me with the deliberate movement of someone who was doing a job and knew exactly how to do it. "Captain Whitmore?" he said. He used my last name, my rank, both of them, together, in that room, loud enough that the people nearest to me heard it. I felt something happen in my chest. "Yes," I said. "I'm with Executive Ground Services," he said. Your department arranged the car for tonight, for the drive back to Ottawa. He handed me a card, ready whenever you are. In my peripheral vision, I was aware of something changing in the room. The particular quality of attention that shifts when something unexpected happens, and everyone nearby adjusts to take it in. My mother's church friend had stopped talking. A cousin had looked up from her phone, and my father, who had been near the exit saying goodbye, had turned. He was looking at me. He was looking at the driver, at the card in my hand, at the town car visible through the glass of the hall doors. And I watched it happen on his face, the same recalibration that Terry had done when he looked at my insignia, except this time it was different, because Terry was a stranger, and this was my father, and he was recalibrating for the first time in 34 years. I could have said something. I have thought about that moment many times in the months since, and I believe that if I had been a different person, I might have said something pointed. Something designed to land. I had earned the right to it. But I thought about all the years I had spent wanting him to see me, all the promotions I had mentioned almost apologetically, bracing for the deflection, all the times I had sat at tables in rooms where I was an afterthought, waiting for a recognition that had a different address than mine, and I understood, standing there with the driver's card in my hand and the town car idling in the parking lot, that I was done waiting. Thank you, I said to the driver. Give me 5 minutes. He nodded and stepped back toward the entrance to wait. I went to find my mother. She was standing near the dessert table with 2 of my aunts, and when she saw my face she excused herself immediately and came to me, which is one of the things I have always loved about her. She knew my face. I'm heading out, I said. Now, but... She glanced toward the parking lot. She looked at it for a moment. She looked at me. Something shifted in her expression. I couldn't quite name it. Pride maybe, or relief, or both. You okay? She asked. I'm good, I said, and I meant it. I have a meeting in the morning, big one. She hugged me again, the same hug as before, too tight, too long, but this time it felt different. This time it felt like 2 people who understood each other. Drive safe, she said. Then she corrected herself. Well, be safe. I laughed for the first time that evening. I went to get my coat, and as I was pulling it on, my father appeared beside me. Not in front of me, beside me, which was unusual for him, like he wasn't sure what position to take. You're going? He said. Early meeting, I said. Back in Ottawa. A pause. He looked out toward the parking lot. That car, he said. That's? They sent a car for you? The department arranged it, yeah. Another pause. The longest one of the evening. I put on my coat and picked up my bag and waited, because part of me, the part that had driven 4 hours on a Tuesday in November, still wanted to hear what he would say. What exactly do you do? He asked. Up there, in Ottawa. And I realized, standing in that hall coat room with the sounds of the retirement party winding down behind us, that he was actually asking, not making conversation, not being polite. He was asking because something had cracked open in him tonight, and he genuinely didn't know the answer. It should have made me sad. Maybe it did, a little. But mostly what I felt was something I didn't have a clean word for. Something between exhaustion and clarity. The feeling you get when you've been carrying something for a very long time and you finally set it down. I manage procurement contracts for the Department of National Defense, I said. Large-scale contracts. Infrastructure, logistics, services. The files I work with right now are part of a capital project valued at over $2 billion. I said it quietly. I wasn't performing it. It was just the truth. He looked at me. For maybe the first time in my life, he looked at me the way he looked at the sunrise. But I was already buttoning my coat. I said goodnight. I walked to the door. The driver was there, and he held it open, and I walked out into the Hamilton cold, and the town car was warm and quiet inside. And as we pulled out of the lot, I watched the hall lights shrink in the side mirror until they were just a smear of yellow in the dark. I didn't feel triumphant. That's the thing no one tells you about these moments. The ones you've been rehearsing in the back of your head for years. When they finally arrive, they don't feel like winning. They feel like the last chapter of something you didn't choose to write. I had spent so long trying to earn a look that had apparently been available all along, just pointed in the wrong direction. On the highway, somewhere past Mississauga, I rolled my shoulders back and let the tension I'd been carrying since Tuesday go. The road stretched out ahead, long and dark and straight, the kind of drive that turns into thinking and then gradually into something quieter than thinking. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. So proud of you, have always been. I read it at a red light. I held it for a moment. Then I kept going. There's something my unit commander said to me once, during a particularly brutal stretch of a file that felt like it would never close. She said, The work you're doing doesn't need an audience to be real. The decisions you make in rooms that no one sees are still decisions. The things you build still stand, whether or not the people who raised you come to look at them. I thought about that a lot in the weeks after the party. I called my mother the following Sunday. We talked for an hour. She told me my father had asked about me, that he'd told my uncle, after I left, that I worked in defense, that he'd said it in a way that sounded, she thought, like the beginning of understanding something. I didn't let myself feel too much about that. Understanding at the end is still late. It doesn't undo the years of feeling like a footnote. It doesn't give back the dinners where I sat at the back table. It doesn't give back the promotion announcements I made quietly, because I had learned to expect indifference. It doesn't give back the energy I spent, years and years of it, trying to close a gap that he had created and only he could close. But I also know this. I don't carry it the same way anymore. Something shifted in that coat room, and I think it was me. Not him. Me. Because I stopped waiting for the moment to be bigger than it was. I stopped needing him to say the right thing so I could finally feel okay. The town car was waiting, and Ottawa was 4 hours north, and I had a $2 billion file on my desk and a meeting at 9. And somewhere between those things in the cold November air, I found something solid. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not yet. Maybe not ever, entirely. But something adjacent to it, the kind of peace that doesn't require the other person to be different. The kind you make yourself, quietly, on a long drive home, in the dark. The kind that doesn't need an audience. My name is Evelyn Whitmore. I am a captain in the Canadian Armed Forces. I have built a life I am proud of, out of the parts I chose myself. And I am finally, at 34 years old, done needing my father to know that in order for it to be true.